Lady Catherine Blackwood's hand trembled as she crossed the threshold into the drawing room. That October afternoon, the scent of bergamot rising from the tea service laid out with precision on the mahogany table. Her mother-in-law sat in her customary chair, spine straight as a column, pouring tea for 3 witnesses who turned to watch Catherine enter. Lady Helena Blackwood lifted the Sèvres pot with practiced grace, filled Edward's cup to the brim, and before Catherine could take her seat, said in a voice that carried to every corner of the room, "She's pregnant, isn't she?" The cup Catherine had been reaching for slipped through her fingers, shattering against the dark wood in a spray of porcelain dust and scalding tea. Helena set the pot down with deliberate calm and remarked, "And now she has broken the porcelain. How fitting." The 3 guests, Lady Pemberton, Mrs. Ashcroft, and Sir Charles Waring, sat frozen in their chairs, teacups suspended mid-air. Catherine stared at the shattered fragments scattered across the table, her breath coming shallow and quick. She looked to Edward. He sat 3 chairs from her, his face a perfect mask. His jaw was set, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the window. He said nothing. Catherine spoke quietly. "Edward." He did not turn his head. Lady Pemberton cleared her throat and set her cup down with a soft clink. "Perhaps we should—" "There's no need to leave," Helena said smoothly. "Catherine is simply overwrought. The autumn weather affects her nerves." Catherine's hands curled into fists at her sides. She looked at Edward again, willing him to speak, to contradict his mother, and to say anything at all. But he remained silent, his expression unchanged, as though he had not heard a word. "I am not overwrought," Catherine said, her voice steadier now. "And I am not pregnant." Helena smiled, a thin curve of her lips that did not reach her eyes. "Of course not, my dear. Forgive me. I should not have spoken so carelessly." The apology was worse than the accusation. It hung in the air like smoke, acknowledged and dismissed in the same breath. Catherine's chest tightened. She turned and walked from the room, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Behind her, she heard the murmur of voices resuming, the clink of china, the rustle of skirts. The drawing room continued without her. She climbed the stairs to her bedchamber and closed the door behind her. The room was cold. The fire had not yet been lit. She stood in the center of the rug, her hands still trembling, and waited. It was 20 minutes before she heard his footsteps in the corridor. The door opened. Edward stepped inside and closed it quietly behind him. He spoke first. "My mother was wrong." Catherine turned to face him. "She said it before 3 people. He nodded. "I know. You said nothing before 3 people." Edward's jaw tightened. "I did not wish to make the scene worse." "You did not make it anything at all." He crossed the room and reached for her hands. She pulled them away. "Catherine," he said softly, "she was wrong. You know she was wrong." "Which harmed me more, Edward?" Catherine asked, her voice trembling now. "Her public accusation or your public silence?" He stared at her, and for a moment she thought he would answer. But he only shook his head and turned toward the window. He spoke at last. "I will speak to her. Privately." Catherine's breath caught. "Privately." He confirmed it. "Yes. She humiliated me before witnesses, and you will correct her behind closed doors. It is the better way." "Better for whom?" Edward turned back to her, and there was something in his eyes, something she could not name. "For both of us," he said quietly. Catherine looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked to the adjoining door that led to the smaller bedroom, the one she had never used. She opened it and stepped inside. "Catherine." She closed the door between them. Edward stood on the other side, his hand resting on the wood. He pleaded softly, "Please, She did not answer. He knocked once, softly. Then again. She heard his breath through the door, and heard the shift of his weight on the floorboards. After a long silence, his footsteps retreated down the corridor. Catherine sat on the edge of the narrow bed and pressed her hands to her face. The room smelled of disuse and lavender sachets. She did not cry. She simply sat in the silence and learned what it felt like to close a door on a man who had never opened one for her. The next morning, Edward knocked on her door at 7 o'clock. Catherine did not answer. She heard him wait in the corridor, heard the rustle of his clothing as he shifted his weight, heard the quiet exhale before he walked away. At breakfast, his place was set at the head of the table. Hers was laid beside it, as it had been every morning since their wedding 8 months ago. She did not go down. Martha, her maid, brought a tray to her room. "His Grace asked if you were unwell, my lady," Catherine replied evenly. "Tell him I am perfectly well." Martha hesitated. "He is waiting in the breakfast room." "Then he may wait." The maid curtsied and left. Catherine ate alone, the toast cold and the tea bitter. At 11 o'clock, Edward found her in the library. She was standing at the window, looking out at the gray October sky. She heard him enter but did not turn. He said her name. "Catherine?" "I am reading," she replied, though there was no book in her hands. "I spoke to my mother this morning." "Did you?" "She understands that she was mistaken." Catherine turned to face him. "Does she?" He nodded. "Yes." "And did she apologize?" Edward hesitated. She regrets the misunderstanding." "That is not an apology." "It is as close as she will come." Catherine's hands tightened on the windowsill. "And you accept that?" "I accept that it is done." "It is not done, Edward. It will never be done. Those 3 people heard what she said. They will repeat it. By tomorrow, half of London will believe I am with child, or that I have lost one, or that I am barren. And you have done nothing to stop it." Edward stepped closer. "I have done what I can." "You have done what is convenient." His expression hardened. "That is unfair." "Is it?" Catherine's voice rose now. "She spoke before witnesses. You corrected her in private. How is that unfair?" Edward reached for her hand. This time she did not pull away, but she did not return his grip either. His thumb traced the line of her knuckles, and the same gesture he had made 100 times before. "I love you," he said quietly. She acknowledged it. "I know you do." "Then trust me." Catherine looked down at their joined hands. "I will not accept tenderness that exists only where no one can witness it," she said. She pulled her hand free and walked past him, out of the library, leaving him standing alone by the window. 3 days later, Martha was dismissed. Catherine learned of it when she rang for her maid at 8 o'clock, and Mrs. Cole appeared instead. Mrs. Cole was Helena's woman, a thin, sharp-eyed creature who had served the Dowager Duchess for 20 years. Catherine asked immediately, "Where is Martha?" "Her Grace has made a household reorganization, my lady," Mrs. Cole said, her voice flat. "Martha has been given a position in the country estate. I am to attend you now." Catherine set down her brush. "I was not consulted." Her Grace felt it was time for a change. Her Grace does not have authority over my personal staff. Mrs. Cole's expression did not shift. "Perhaps you might discuss it with her, my lady." Catherine stood and crossed the room. "Send Martha back to me." "She has already departed, my lady. The carriage left at dawn." Catherine's hands curled into fists. "Then send for her." "I am afraid that is not within my authority." Catherine stared at the woman, her pulse quickening. "Leave me." Mrs. Cole curtsied and withdrew. Catherine dressed herself, her hands shaking as she fastened the buttons at her wrists. When she went downstairs, she found Helena in the breakfast room, reading a letter with her tea. Catherine spoke without preamble. "I'll show you dismissed my maid." Helena looked up, her expression serene. "Good morning, Catherine. I trust you slept well. You dismissed Martha without consulting me. I reorganized the household. It is my responsibility as mistress of this house." "I am mistress of this house?" Helena smiled. "You are Edward's wife. I am the duchess. There is a difference." Catherine's breathing quickened. "Bring her back." "That would be impractical. She is already settled at the country estate." "Then I will go to the country estate." "That would be inadvisable in your condition." Catherine froze. "What condition?" Helena set down her letter. "You are pale, my dear. You have missed breakfast 3 mornings this week. You are clearly unwell. The country air might do you good, but a journey of that length would be taxing. I am not unwell." Helena lifted her teacup with measured grace. "Of course not, but one must be cautious." Catherine turned and left the room before she could say something she would regret. She found Edward in his study. He was reading correspondence, a stack of letters piled on his desk. He looked up when she entered. Catherine stated it plainly. "Your mother has dismissed Martha." Edward set down his pen. "I know." "You knew?" "She mentioned it this morning." "And you said nothing?" "I said I would speak to you about it." Catherine's hands shook. "She has replaced my maid with her own woman. She has sent Martha to the country without my permission. And you said you would speak to me about it?" Edward stood and came around the desk. I will speak to her." "Privately?" "Catherine, every attack is structural, Edward. Every repair is invisible. Do you not see that?" He reached for her, but she stepped back. He spoke with quiet conviction. "I see it, and I am managing it. You are managing it behind closed doors, because that is where it can be managed." Catherine stared at him. "You are afraid of her." "I am not afraid of her." "Then why will you not stand against her where anyone can see?" Edward's expression tightened. He did not answer. Catherine turned and walked out. That evening, there was a dinner. Helena had invited Lady Sophia Tremaine to stay at the house as an old family friend. Lady Sophia was beautiful, poised, and everything Catherine was not. A duke's daughter with impeccable lineage and a dowry that could fund a small army. At dinner, Helena rearranged the seating. Catherine's place card was moved to the far end of the table, positioned as a guest rather than the hostess. Lady Sophia sat at Edward's right hand. Catherine took her seat without a word. Edward glanced at her once, then turned his attention to Lady Sophia. The meal passed in a blur of polite conversation. Lady Sophia spoke of London, of the season, of mutual acquaintances. Edward responded with the same quiet courtesy he showed everyone. He did not look at Catherine again. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing room. Helena poured tea, the same Sèvres service, minus the broken cup. Lady Sophia sat beside her, laughing at some remark Catherine had not heard. Catherine stood by the window, her hands clasped in front of her, and watched the rain streak the glass. When the men rejoined them, Edward took a seat near the fire. He did not come to her. At 11 o'clock, Catherine excused herself and went upstairs. She undressed in silence, Mrs. Cole's hands efficient and cold where Martha's had been warm. When the maid left, Catherine climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling. An hour later, the connecting door opened. Edward stepped into her room, still dressed, his cravat loosened. Catherine spoke into the darkness. "You did not speak to me all evening." "There were guests." "Exactly." Edward closed the door behind him and crossed to the bed. He sat on the edge and reached for her hand. She let him take it. He said quietly, "I am trying to protect you. By erasing me? By keeping the peace?" Catherine pulled her hand free. "There is no peace, Edward. There is only silence." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. He whispered it. "I love you." She replied softly, "I know, but you love me only where no one can see." He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. Then he stood and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Catherine lay in the darkness and listened to the rain. 2 days later, Edward left a book on her pillow. It was a volume of poetry, bound in green leather with a corner folded to mark a particular verse. The poem was about constancy, about love that endured through silence and storm. Catherine read it twice, then set the book on her bedside table. She did not thank him. The next afternoon, she was walking in the kitchen garden when Edward appeared at the gate. He was in shirt sleeves, and his coat discarded somewhere, his hair disheveled by the wind. He asked permission. "May I walk with you?" Catherine nodded. They walked in silence for a few minutes, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. Then Edward stopped and turned to face her. He made a simple request. "Give me your hand." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He turned it palm up and traced the lines with his fingertips, the touch so light it made her shiver. "I know this hand," he said quietly. "I hold it every night, but I have never held it where anyone can see." Catherine's breath caught. She looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled around hers. She asked the question. "Why not?" Edward's expression tightened. "Because I am a coward." "You are not a coward." "Then what am I?" Catherine closed her fingers around his, or I do not know. They stood in the garden, the wind pulling at her skirts, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But he only held her hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on her palm, and said nothing. When they returned to the house, Helena was in the drawing room with Lady Sophia. Edward dropped Catherine's hand before they reached the door. At breakfast the next morning, he sat 3 chairs distant and did not look at her once. Catherine began to understand the pattern. He was tender only where no one could see. The night she told him about the baby, it was raining again. Catherine had waited until they were alone in the bedchamber, the fire burning low, the house silent around them. She said his name. "Edward." He looked up from the letter he was reading. "Yes?" "I am pregnant." The letter fell from his hands. He stared at her, his face pale in the firelight. He needed confirmation. "You are certain?" She nodded. "Yes." Edward crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her chair. He pressed his forehead against her stomach, his hands gripping her waist, and she felt the shudder that ran through him. He whispered her name. "Catherine. Catherine." She placed her hands on his head, her fingers threading through his hair. He was weeping, silent, shaking sobs that made her chest ache. "I love you," he said, his voice muffled against her dress. "I love you so much." She acknowledged it. "I know." He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. "I will take care of you. I will take care of both of you." Catherine cupped his face in her hands. "I know you will." He kissed her then, his hands tangling in her hair, and then she let herself believe that this time would be different, that the man who wept against her stomach would be the same man who sat beside her at breakfast. She was wrong. The next morning, Helena joined them in the breakfast room. Edward sat at the head of the table, his expression composed, his hands steady as he buttered his toast. Catherine sat 3 chairs away, her tea untouched. Helena poured herself a cup and remarked, "You look pale, Catherine. The country air might suit you better for the coming months." Edward said nothing. Catherine set down her cup with a sharp clink. "I am perfectly well," Helena replied smoothly. "Of course. But one must be cautious, especially now." Catherine looked at Edward. He was staring at his plate, his posture rigid, his hands gripping his knife and fork as though they might fly away. Then she said his name. "Edward." He did not look up. Helena smiled. "I have already written to the country estate. The rooms are being prepared." Catherine stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "Excuse me." She left the room, her hands shaking, her vision blurred. She climbed the stairs to her bedchamber and closed the door. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her stomach. That evening, Edward came to her room. He knocked softly, then entered without waiting for a response. He said her name. "Catherine." She did not look at him. "You said nothing." "I did not want to make it worse." "You made it nothing at all." Edward crossed the room and knelt beside her chair. "I am trying to protect you." "By letting her send me away?" "She is not sending you away. She is suggesting, she is arranging it." "Edward, she has already written to the estate. She has already made the decision, and you sat there and said nothing." Edward's hands curled into fists on his thighs. "I will speak to her. Privately." He confirmed it. "Yes." Catherine looked at him, her throat tight. "You hold my hand under every table. You have never held it above one." Edward stared at her, his face pale. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to choose me. Publicly. Where everyone can see." He stood and turned away, his shoulders tense. "It is not that simple." "Why not?" He did not answer. Catherine stood and crossed to him. "Edward, why is it not that simple?" He turned to face her, and there was something in his eyes, something raw and desperate. "Because I made a deal," he said quietly. Catherine's breath caught. "What deal?" Edward shook his head. "I cannot—" "What deal, Edward?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and left the room. Catherine stood in the silence, her hands pressed to her stomach, and understood. The pregnancy would be managed the same way the marriage had been, behind closed doors. Mrs. Jennings found Catherine in the linen press corridor 3 days later. Catherine was folding the baby's clothes, small, soft garments she had sewn herself in the evenings when Edward was at his club. Mrs. Jennings was the housekeeper who had served Edward's first wife, Anne, for 2 years before her death. Mrs. Jennings offered assistance. "May I help you, my lady?" Catherine looked up. "Thank you, but I'm nearly finished." Mrs. Jennings stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "Forgive me, my lady, but I must speak to you." Catherine set down the garment she was folding. "What is it?" Mrs. Jennings hesitated, her hands clasped in front of her. "I served Lady Anne for 2 years before she passed. I watched her fold linen just as you are doing now, and I heard her ask a question I think you have not yet asked." Catherine felt her pulse quicken. "What question?" "She asked me once if I thought His Grace loved her. I said yes. She said, 'Then why does love have a door it only opens from one side?'" Catherine's breath caught. "She died 3 months later," Mrs. Jennings continued quietly. "I have watched you fold linen for 8 months, my lady, and I hear the same question you have not asked." Catherine's hands trembled. Did she love him? Very much. And did he love her? I believe he did. But she never saw it where anyone else could. Catherine looked down at the tiny garment in her hands. What did she die of? Consumption, they said. But I think she died of being invisible. Mrs. Jennings curtsied and left the room. Catherine sat alone in the linen press, the baby's clothes folded neatly in her lap, and understood. She was not the first woman trapped inside Edward's private tenderness. But unlike Anne, she would not die of it. That evening, she found Edward in the library. He was standing by the fire, a glass of brandy in his hand. Catherine spoke from the doorway. Mrs. Jennings spoke to me today. Edward turned. What did she say? She told me about Anne. Edward's face went pale. Catherine. She said Anne asked why love has a door that only opens from one side. Did you make a deal about her visibility too? Edward set down his glass, his hand shaking. It was not the same. Was it not? Anne was different. She was your wife, Edward. Just as I am your wife. And you kept her behind the same closed doors. Edward crossed the room and reached for her hands. I did not keep Anne anywhere. She was ill. She could not. She asked Mrs. Jennings if you loved her. She did not ask you. Do you not see what that means? Edward's grip tightened. I loved her. But she did not know it, not where it mattered. Edward pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her, his face buried in her hair. I will not lose you the way I lost her. Catherine pressed her hands against his chest. Then choose me, Edward, publicly, where everyone can see. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. I am trying. You are not trying, you are managing, and I am tired of being managed. Edward's expression hardened. What do you want me to do? I want you to tell me about the deal you made. Edward stepped back, his face closing. I cannot. Why not? Because it will change everything. Everything is already changed, Edward. I am carrying your child. Your mother is sending me to the country, and you are standing here telling me you cannot choose me. What more is there to change? Edward turned away, his posture rigid. She offered me a deal when I married you. She would maintain the political alliances if I would keep you quiet. Catherine's breath stopped. Quiet. She did not choose you, Catherine. She wanted Lady Sophia. When I married you instead, she made the terms explicit. I could have you, but I could not display you. Not at political dinners, not in society, not where it would embarrass her candidate. Catherine's hands curled into fists. And you agreed. I thought I was protecting you. You were purchasing my invisibility. Edward turned back to her, his face stricken. I thought you would benefit from the Ashford position more than you would suffer from my public reserve. I was wrong. Catherine stared at him. Was I the price or the product? Edward's face crumpled. Both. Catherine turned and walked out of the library. She climbed the stairs to her bedchamber, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. She did not cry. She simply sat in the silence and understood. Every silent breakfast, every uncorrected slight, every time he held her hand under the table instead of above it. Thank God that was the deal working. Not fear, not temperament. A transaction he maintained because he told himself she was better off inside it. She was not better off. She was Anne. The next morning, Helena announced that the country estate was ready. The carriage would arrive in 2 days. The physician had been contacted. The rooms had been aired. Catherine began to pack. Edward found her in her bedchamber that evening, her trunks open on the floor, her dresses folded neatly inside. He stated the obvious. You are leaving. Catherine did not look up. Your mother has arranged it. You do not have to go. Do I not? Edward crossed the room and knelt beside her trunk. Stay, please. Catherine looked at him. Why? Because I love you. You love me behind closed doors, Edward. I am tired of closed doors. Edward's hands gripped the edge of the trunk. I will end the arrangement. I will tell her. You will tell her privately, and nothing will change. It will change, I promise you. Catherine stood and walked to the window. I do not believe you. Edward rose and crossed to her. He placed his hands on her shoulders and turned her to face him. What can I do to make you believe me? Catherine looked up at him. Open the doors, Edward. All of them. Where everyone can see. Edward stared at her, his face pale. Then he nodded. He said it firmly. I will. Catherine did not answer. She turned back to the window and watched the rain. The next day, Sir William Mercer arrived. He was Catherine's uncle, a baronet with a seat in Parliament and a reputation for plain speaking. He asked to speak with Catherine privately. They met in the library. Sir William closed the door behind him and gestured for Catherine to sit. Your mother-in-law has written to me, he said. She suggests that you are unwell and require country air. Catherine's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. I am perfectly well. Sir William nodded. I know you are. He sat across from her. She also suggests that the Duke has been very attentive to your needs. Catherine's expression hardened. He has been attentive in private. Sir William nodded. That is what I thought. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. Catherine, I'm going to tell you something I should have told you before you married. Love that refuses to be witnessed is love that refuses to be tested. You have the right to demand more. Catherine's throat tightened. I have demanded more. He says he will change. And do you believe him? Catherine looked down at her hands. I do not know. Sir William reached across and covered her hands with his. Then tell him this. If he does not choose you publicly, you will leave. Not to the country estate, to my house. And you will not return until he proves that his love can survive daylight. Catherine looked up, her eyes burning. I have already decided that. The library door opened. Edward stepped inside, his face pale. He apologized. Forgive me. I did not know you were here, Sir William. Sir William stood. I was just leaving. He turned to Catherine. Remember what I said? Catherine nodded. Sir William left, closing the door behind him. Edward stood in the center of the room, then his hands at his sides. He asked carefully. What did he say? Catherine stood and crossed to the window. He said that love which refuses to be witnessed is love that refuses to be tested. Edward's expression tightened. He is right. Catherine turned to face him. I will not go to the country estate, Edward. I will go to my uncle's house, and I will not return until you prove that your love can survive daylight. Edward stared at her, his face stricken. Catherine, I mean it, Edward. If you do not choose me publicly, I will leave. Edward crossed the room and reached for her hands. She let him take them. He made his vow. I will choose you. I swear it. Catherine looked up at him. Then do it now, before I leave. Edward nodded. I will. He kissed her forehead, then left the room. Catherine stood by the window and watched the rain streak the glass. She did not know if she believed him, but she knew she could not stay if he did not prove it. The drawing room was exactly as it had been 3 weeks ago. The same mahogany table, the same chairs arranged in a precise circle, the same Sèvres tea service laid out with mathematical precision, minus the cup Catherine had shattered. Helena sat in her customary chair, her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap. Lady Pemberton, Mrs. Ashcroft, and Sir Charles Waring had been invited again, their presence a deliberate echo of the first scene. Catherine entered the room at 3 o'clock. Her trunks were packed. The carriage waited outside, the horses stamping in the October cold. She wore her traveling dress, her gloves buttoned to the wrist. Helena looked up and smiled. "Catherine, how good of you to join us. I was just telling Lady Pemberton that the country estate is ready for you." Catherine crossed to the window and looked out at the carriage. The driver was checking the harness. Her trunks were being loaded into the boot. Helena gestured graciously. "Sit down, my dear. We have time for tea before you depart." Catherine turned from the window. "I'm not going to the country estate." Helena's smile did not waver. "Of course you are. It is all arranged. I am going to my uncle's house." The room went silent. Lady Pemberton's teacup froze halfway to her lips. Mrs. Ashcroft's eyes widened. Sir Charles coughed and looked away. Helena set down the teapot with deliberate precision. "That would be most inappropriate?" "Would it? You are the Duchess of Ashford. You cannot simply—" The drawing-room doors opened. Edward stepped inside. He was dressed for Parliament, his coat perfectly tailored, his cravat tied with precision. But his face was pale, his posture tense, his hands curled into fists at his sides. He looked at Catherine standing by the window. He looked at Helena seated at the tea table. He looked at the 3 witnesses arranged in their chairs like judges at a trial. Then he walked to the drawing-room doors, both of them, and pulled them wide open. The corridor stretched beyond, the entrance hall visible at the far end, the staff moving past with linens and trays. Helena spoke sharply. "Edward, what are you doing?" Edward did not answer. He walked to the breakfast room and opened that door. Then the library door. Then the morning room. He moved through the house like a man possessed, opening every door between the drawing room and the entrance hall, until the entire ground floor was visible from where Catherine stood. He returned to the drawing room and stopped in the center of the rug. His chest was heaving, his face flushed. Helena's voice was cold. "Sit down, Edward. She has agreed the country air would be best for her condition. The physician has been contacted. The rooms are prepared. There is no need for this display." Edward stated it plainly. "She has not agreed." Helena's eyes narrowed. "Of course she has. I arranged it myself." "You arranged it. She did not agree to it." Helena stood, her hands gripping the back of her chair. "You are being ridiculous. Sit down." He refused. "No." The word fell into the room like a stone into still water. Oh, Lady Pemberton gasped. Mrs. Ashcroft's hand flew to her mouth. Sir Charles shifted in his seat. Helena's face went white. "What did you say?" Edward repeated it. "I said no." He turned to face her fully. "I am ending the arrangement." "What arrangement?" "The one you offered me when I married Catherine. You would maintain the political alliances. I would maintain public reserve. I would not display her at political dinners. I would not challenge your household authority. I would not make the marriage visible enough to embarrass Lady Sophia." The room was utterly silent. Catherine's breath stopped. Edward continued, his voice steady now. "I called it protecting her. It was not. It was purchasing her invisibility with my career. And I let her pay the price." Helena's hands trembled on the chair back. "You are mad." Edward shook his head. "I am not mad. I am ending it." He turned to Catherine. "My mother offered me a deal when I married you. She would keep the alliances, the Pemberton connection, the borough votes, the Ashford political network, if I would keep you quiet. If I would maintain appearances. If I would make sure you did not embarrass her chosen candidate." Catherine's hands pressed to her stomach. "You agreed." He admitted it. "Yes. And every silent breakfast, every uncorrected slight, every time I held your hand under the table instead of above it. That was the deal working. Not fear, not temperament. A transaction I maintained because I told myself you were better off inside it. I was not better off. He acknowledged it. No. You were Anne. The name hung in the air. Helena's face went gray, and Edward turned back to his mother. Mrs. Jennings told Catherine about Anne, about the question Anne asked her. Why love has a door that only opens from one side. He paused, his voice breaking. I built Catherine the same door. Different house, same architecture. And I have already watched one woman leave this house without hearing me say what I should have said. Helena's voice was ice. You will lose the Pemberton alliance. Edward accepted it. Then I will lose it. You will lose 3 seats in Parliament. I will lose 3 seats. You will lose your career. Edward's hands uncurled at his sides. I will lose my career, but I will not lose her. Helena stared at him, her chest heaving. You are a fool. He agreed. Perhaps. But I am a fool who is opening the doors. He turned to Catherine. She was standing by the window, her hands pressed to her stomach, her face pale. She spoke quietly. You made a deal about me. He confirmed it. Yes. You traded my visibility for your mother's cooperation. Yes. And you maintained it for 8 months. Yes. Catherine's voice shook. Was I the price or the product? Edward's face crumpled. Both. And I am sorry, I am so sorry. Catherine walked to the tea table. She lifted the replacement cup, the one that had not shattered, and poured tea into it with steady hands. She set it on the table in front of Edward. She observed simply, This cup is not broken. Edward looked down at it. No. The last one broke because your mother said something terrible and you said nothing. This one is whole because you said something. He agreed. Yes. That is not forgiveness, Edward. His breath caught. Catherine continued. That is evidence. Evidence that the door is open. Edward stared at her, his eyes red-rimmed. Is it enough? Catherine looked at the open doors, at the corridor stretching beyond, at the staff pausing to watch, at the 3 witnesses frozen in their chairs. She answered carefully. It is a beginning. Helena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is intolerable. Edward spoke quietly. Then leave. Helena stared at him, her face white with fury. Then she turned and walked from the room, her skirts sweeping the floor, her footsteps echoing in the corridor. Lady Pemberton rose and curtsied. Forgive me. We should. Edward agreed. Yes, you should. The 3 witnesses left in a rustle of silk and murmured apologies. The drawing-room doors remained open. Catherine stood by the tea table, the intact cup between them. Edward crossed the room and stopped in front of her. He began listing his intentions. I will write to the Pemberton family tomorrow. I will withdraw from the alliance. I will tell Helena that her household authority is revoked. I will... Catherine interrupted gently. Edward. He stopped. She said simply, the doors are open. That is enough for today. Edward's hands trembled as he reached for hers. This time, when he held them, it was above the table, in the center of the room, with the corridor visible beyond and the staff passing in the hall. Catherine did not pull away. 3 weeks later, the broken Sèvres cup sat on the drawing-room mantel. It had been repaired with gold lacquer, the cracks visible and gleaming, a deliberate reminder of what had shattered and what had been remade. The replacement cup was in daily use. Every morning, Edward poured Catherine's tea. He did it at the breakfast table with Helena absent and the servants present. He did it in the drawing room when guests called. He did it in the garden when they took tea on the terrace. The drawing room doors stayed open. Helena had withdrawn to the London townhouse. She had not spoken to Edward since the day he ended the arrangement. The Pemberton alliance had collapsed. Edward had lost 2 seats in Parliament and a proxy vote he had held for 3 years. He did not speak of it. Catherine's trunks had been unpacked. Mrs. Cole had been dismissed. Martha had returned from the country estate and resumed her duties with a quiet smile. The nursery was being prepared. When one afternoon in November, Catherine found Edward in the nursery. He was sitting in the chair by the window, reading aloud from a book of children's stories. The door was open. The hallway was visible beyond. Catherine stood in the doorway and watched him. His voice was soft, his hand steady on the pages. The firelight caught the gold in his hair. She observed it. "You are reading with the door open." Edward looked up and smiled. "I am practicing." "Practicing what?" "Being visible." Catherine crossed the room and sat on the arm of his chair. He placed his hand on the back of her neck, his thumb tracing the line of her spine. She leaned into the touch. She noted it. "The hallway is lit." He acknowledged it. "I know. Anyone passing can see us." "I know." Catherine placed her hand over his, pressing it against her neck. She said simply, "Good." Edward set down the book and pulled her into his lap. She curled against him, her head on his shoulder, his arms wrapped around her. The door remained open. The hallway remained lit. And when a maid passed with linens and glanced into the room, Edward did not move. He simply held his wife where anyone could see, and he did not let go.